Hi and welcome back to the channel. Yes, the camera is on a funny angle, but bear with me. First things first, I survived Sydney, had a great time up there. I am vlogging the Sydney trip. Took a lot of footage. I'm going to do a voiceover. I'm going to make it look all crisp and wonderful. And that'll be in a future video. But for now, we're going to talk about movies, funnily enough. I mentioned late last year in a video that I had won an award, the William Atheling Jr Award for criticism or review of a science fiction for the reviews in Terry Talks Movies, and I've got them, and I've finally got the award. There it is with a book on the background because it's a glass award, but there's the actual physical award I got, and I am so pleased to get it. Haven't won a DITMA award for 26 years before this one, so I look forward to getting another one in 2047. But leaving that aside, thank you to everybody who voted, and thank you for everybody who supported the channel and encouraged me to make better videos, which I am attempting to do. So I've got a couple of things going on in this video. First off, I'm going to be reviewing two wuxia movies from the 1970s, one very well known and one less known, but they're kind of related to each other. And I'm also going to do a haul of the movie-related stuff that I picked up on my trip to Sydney. As most of you know, the 1970s were a weird time of weird cultural passions, and there was none quite as big until later in the decade than the cult of Bruce Lee. He came on board with a bunch of movies, things like The Big Boss and The Way of the Dragon and Fists of Fury. Of course, he had previously worked in Hollywood. He'd done the Green Hornet TV series in the 1960s. He did a movie called Marlowe with James Garner, which was really good. And then he went over and made some Hong Kong movies after doing a little bit of television as well, and hit it big. Warner Brothers decided they needed to have a wuxia movie starring Bruce Lee, and they created Enter the Dragon. 1973, and it blasted across the cinematic landscape. It did really well, particularly in drive-in theatres and grindhouse theatres. In Sydney, it played the big cinemas, and I really appreciated that because I was a little tired of going down into Liverpool Street and trying to figure out, based on the posters, which movies were being shown in the Chinese cinemas. Then came Enter the Dragon, and it's a slick product. I'm going to do a bit of a review of it and tell you how I think it could have been better. Bruce Lee plays a guy called Lee, who is an instructor at a Shaolin temple in Hong Kong. He is encouraged by the British government to go to a martial arts tournament on the island of a man called Han, played by Shi Kin, who every 3 years has a martial arts tournament, and who's also involved in things like people trafficking and drug dealing and drug production and manufacture, and is in general not a nice man. At the same time, two other martial artists from America are going to Han's tournament. There's Roper, played by Saxon, who is a gambler and a bit of a chancer. And there's Williams, a black martial artist who studies Kempo Karate, and he's played by Jim Kelly, who went on to have a small career in movies like Three the Hard Way and Black Bill Jones, but didn't really do too much apart from that. He became a teacher of martial arts, but his movie career wasn't particularly long. Lee has a bit of a personal angle there because the last time Han held a tournament, his men went on shore in Hong Kong and tried to assault his sister, who committed suicide rather than suffer the injustice of being raped by Han's men. And she's played in the flashback by Angela Mao Yin, a Hapkido expert who is Taiwanese born, and she's quite good in the small flashback role that she has in the film as well. The movie was directed by an American director called Robert Klaus, who had worked for MGM in the 1960s. In 1970, he made one of the best MGM crime films of the era, Darker Than Amber, starring Rod Taylor, and that movie needs a Blu-ray release if anything ever did. And he also went on to make a number of other films. He worked on the project Bruce Lee was working on when he died, Game of Death, which was finished quite shabbily posthumously, but isn't particularly one of my favourite Bruce Lee films. Because this is a Warner Brothers film, it's got some very slick production values. It was done in collaboration with Hong Kong studios. It's just a lovely package. You've got the wonderful, iconic music by Lalo Schifrin, which is really on point. I remember I had the soundtrack to this on cassette and used to play it a lot. It's a slick soundtrack, very full and orchestral with some Chinese sounding themes in it. And yeah, I'd say it'd be in my top 20 soundtracks of the 1970s. So Lee, Roper and Williams go to the tournament and find out that Han throws a good party. He throws sex workers at them as evening recreations. He has an army of martial artists at his beck and call on his island. But what the whole idea of the martial arts tournament is to recruit talent for his criminal organisation. He's already got a bunch of guys working for him who are top martial artists. He's got the wonderful Bolo Yung playing one of his enforcers. And one thing Robert Klaus knew was how to film action. And I think he did a really good job. He uses a few little camera tricks which are more familiar to students of Asian martial arts films. And yet he still has that nice thing of knowing when to do a long shot, knowing when to do a close-up, knowing when to do a mid-shot, how to frame the action quite well. And it works really well. And of course, this is Bruce Lee at his peak. This is Bruce Lee being able to be Bruce Lee. His personality comes across, his cockiness, his incredible skills at martial arts, and also at martial arts on camera, which are two very different talents. And he's an interesting actor too, because he does a lot with not much. Sometimes it's just a look or the tilt of a head, and you can tell what his character is thinking in the best possible way. He was a child actor in Hong Kong. He had a lot of years of skills in front of a camera, and it shows in this. And then you've got John Saxon, who started out as a bit of a teen heartthrob in the 50s and moved into more mature roles in the 60s. He went over to Italy and did a few gialli in the 60s as well. He was a jobbing actor, and he was also a martial artist. And so his skills are on display as well, and they're pretty good. They're maybe nowhere near as good as, say, Bruce Lee or Jim Kelly, but he holds his own in the action scenes and he knows how to play to a camera. And then you've got Jim Kelly with his afro and his really slick threads and his attitude. Even though Jim Kelly wasn't a particularly gifted actor, he was a great persona, particularly in this film. His Williams is confident, knows who he is, knows not to take bullshit from anybody, and is a fine martial artist in his own style. And Jim Kelly really puts that across wonderfully in this film. So how could the movie be made better? That's where we get into the spoilers. Williams gets killed by Han after Han thinks that he's infiltrating his organisation and finding out about the criminal enterprises going beyond and behind the martial arts tournament. That was done because John Saxon didn't want to die in the movie. And I think that was a mistake because having Roper die, and Roper's already a bit sketchy and little associated with criminals anyway, so it's not unreasonable that Han would try to recruit him. And if Roper denied that, Roper would then be killed by Han and his men. And that would then leave Jim Kelly and Bruce Lee to do the final fight against all the martial artists, against Bolo Yung, against Han himself, and when all of the prisoners escape and start bashing on the martial artists. I think it would have been a lot stronger an action climax were Jim Kelly and Bruce Lee to go back to back, taking out these guys. They've both got the same cocky attitude. They both got the same confident energy. And they're people who are not the white guy. Now, one of the horrible tropes of cinema from the 1950s onwards is that if you have a black guy in an action movie, the black guy is always the first guy to die. And unfortunately, Enter the Dragon falls prey to this in killing Williams. When they should have flipped the narrative, people were expecting the black guy to die first and have the white guy die first. I think that would have been a nice flip of the expectations of the audience, and I think it would have led to a more dynamic climax for Enter the Dragon. I think that there's a real missed opportunity there. Even though I do like John Saxon, I like a lot of the work he's done. He went on to do things like Nightmare on Elm Street, where he played the cop father of the protagonist. But of course, Bruce Lee died in 1973 of an allergic reaction to non-prescribed medication in Hong Kong. And that's a bit of a shame, because it makes you wonder what would have happened had Bruce Lee lived. Would Jackie Chan, who turns up as an extra in Enter the Dragon, he gets his neck broken by Bruce Lee, would he have become such a prominent star if Bruce Lee had survived? Would he and Bruce Lee have done a buddy movie? What kind of movies would Bruce Lee be making if he were still alive now? There are a lot of questions there, and none of which has got a good answer. But it's always fun to speculate on movie stars who have an early death. This version by Warner Brothers is a nice little package of Enter the Dragon, by the way. It's got a whole bunch of different featurettes. One of them looks at the locations of the movie as they are now, and they've changed a lot over the years, as indeed has Hong Kong. There's a documentary about Wing Chun Kung Fu, the one that introduced Bruce Lee to martial arts, and he developed into Jeet Kune Do, his own style of martial arts. There's a making of documentary in here as well, and a bunch of other documentaries, including a photo gallery of Bruce Lee's life. So just to summarise, Enter the Dragon is probably peak Bruce Lee for me. There are a couple of scenes in Game of Death that are really, really cool, and kind of hinted at a direction that his career might have gone in. Things like his duel with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, for instance. That kind of stuff may have been the direction Bruce Lee wanted to go with his career, and it would have led to wonderful things. But as a package, Enter the Dragon is the one where we see peak Bruce Lee. We get that kind of angry cat sound that he makes. He was ripped as hell at the time and in peak physical condition. And I think that even though the story is kind of simplistic, it's a very old school, almost James Bondish adventure story, which harks back to things like Dr. No a little bit. But for the most part, it works well. It holds up well today. It's got a little bit of social commentary in it, particularly as far as Williams is concerned. And Hollywood would have done a lot better had Bruce Lee stayed alive. I think we would have had a continuation of martial arts films at a high level, much more than really occurred in real life. Yeah, we had other movies. We had things like Golden Needles, for instance. We had the oddities of Shatter, the movie with Stuart Whitman that Hammer did. We had The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, another Hammer film with martial arts elements. But Bruce Lee was a loss to action cinema. And I don't think anybody since his death has quite come up to his level. There have been superb martial artists. I mean, there have been Tony Jaa, there's been Jet Li, there's been Iko Uwais, there have been a whole lot of other people, Jackie Chan most of all. But nobody quite had the package of charisma, talent and acting skills that Bruce Lee had. Just a year before Enter the Dragon was made, there was another martial arts movie made in Hong Kong with one of the stars of Enter the Dragon in it. It wasn't Bruce Lee, it wasn't Jim Kelly, it wasn't John Saxon, it wasn't Bolo Yeung, it wasn't Shi Qian. It was Angela Mao Yin, and that movie is called Hapkido. Now, Hapkido is a Korean martial art, mostly uses the feet, which was their own adaptation on Japanese and Chinese influences. And this movie is set in 1932. 3 Chinese martial arts students study Hapkido in Korea while it was occupied by the Japanese. They then went back to China and opened up a Hapkido school. Now, the 3 students are played by Angela Mao Yin, Carter Wong, and none other than Sammo Hung. They open a school, but the local martial arts school run by the Japanese, teaching karate, doesn't like it. And so you get an antagonism and you get a war started between the martial arts schools. This one's kind of interesting because Jackie Chan also turns up as an extra in this one. You don't see his face, but you see him do a lot of the practical effects and the falls in it. Because, of course, him and Sammo Hung grew up together. They went to the same Peking Opera School in Hong Kong. They were buddies for life and probably will be until one of them dies. So if the story sounds familiar at all, it's because it's pretty much a remake of Fists of Fury with a female protagonist. In fact, in some markets, this movie is known as Lady Whirlwind. And Angela Mulligan is a really interesting martial artist. She has a strong persona in the film. Determined, strong, a moral compass for the other two. And yet she doesn't take any shit from nasty enemies. I mean, you always get several different kinds of bad martial artists in these 1970s wushu movies. You get the guy with the hat and the cigarette holder. And you also get the guy with the Hitler mustache. Both of those you will get in this film. And it's a real lot of fun. It doesn't break any new ground, particularly except maybe in gender explorations of martial arts. But it's a nice, honest wushu movie. And there are some really elaborate setups where the environment is used very well. It's set a lot in warehouses and in tea houses and in martial arts schools. And so the natural props in that kind of environment are used in this one. Now, in the 1970s, even in Hong Kong cinema, were often disrespectful to women. But the odd thing is, in Hapkido, Angela Mulligan's character is treated with respect by the movie makers. They don't try to make her appear sexy in any way. She does, one of the things martial arts schools did in that particular era is they acted as kind of day surgeries for people who had ailments. They did herbal medicine. They didn't have cats scratching at the door. And so they acted as a part of the community. Hapkido was made for Raymond Chow's Golden Harvest Studio. It was directed by Huang Fang, who had done a number of these kind of movies before. And if the light looks like it's moving in the background here while I talk, it is because somebody keeps bumping the light stand now. It'd be really interesting to compare and contrast this film with, of course, Fists of Fury, but also the Shaw Scope box set that I talked about a few videos ago, with all of the Shaw Brothers movies. And then you'd be going down a deep rabbit hole of Hong Kong wuxia cinema, from which you may never emerge. Yeah, I'm very glad this one was recommended to me, because while it's not the best martial arts movie in the world, it's an interesting one, and the fact that such respect is given to a female protagonist in a 1970s movies is something that I really like. And I think gives it a bit of longevity that some of its contemporary films may not have had. By the way, before I drift too far away from Enter the Dragon, I did watch a parody of it after I watched it. In this case, A Fistful of Yen from John Landis's Kentucky Fried Movie, written by Zuckum Abram Zucker. A Fistful of Yen with Evan Kim playing the Bruce Lee role in it is quite funny. It makes fun of the right things to make fun of in Enter the Dragon, and it's a kind of honourable companion piece in a weird way to it. So if you haven't seen that, you really should. It's the whole lot of it is transgressive fun from a 21st century viewpoint. Time for my Sydney movie haul. Now, I went to Chinatown in Sydney. I went to Paddy's Market, and upstairs of Paddy's Market, down the bottom of Dixon Street, there's a little shop that sells weird little stuff, including sketchy copies of movies. Now, these have got to be 15 years old at least, maybe 20. So I talked to the little Chinese woman there, and she said, here's the ones that have got English subtitles in them. I'll sell them to you 3 for $20. Now, I know I got ripped off, but it's okay. I've got 3 lots of movies from 3 Asian action heroes. And some of them are just cheapo, low-res copies of American films in which these actors had appeared. Some of them aren't, and they're the ones that aren't are the ones I went for these before. There's about 12 movies in each one, kind of crammed onto 2 DVDs, which tells me they're going to be low-res as hell, but I'm going to give them a go. First one, Chow Yun-Fat. 12 Chow Yun-Fat movies. There are some weird things in here like Dragon Ball Revolution. There's Anna and the King. There's Bulletproof Monk, Hard Boiled, Once Upon a Time in China. But there are also a whole bunch about which I know absolutely nothing. There's a movie called Hong Kong 1941. And some romantic comedies. I don't think we've got the God of Gamblers movies in here, which is a bit of a shame because God of Gamblers is my go-to Chow Yun-Fat movie. But yeah, so I picked them up. There's the front. There's the back. Like I said, they're probably going to be low res and sketchy as hell, but I may find some hidden gems in there. Second lot is Jet Li. I've got the Jet Li collection. There's the back. Some of the movies we've got in here. The Mummy, The Forbidden Kingdom, which I know is a Hong Kong movie. Expendables 1 and 2. Lethal Weapon 4, Cradle to the Grave. Badges of Fury, Flying Swords of Dragon Gate, about which I know nothing. Something called It's Love and Ocean Heaven. So I think they're two romantic Hong Kong comedies as well. So, like I said, sketchy as hell. But I'm going to put them into the player and just see what's there. The third one is the Donnie Yen collection, with a whole bunch of Donnie Yen movies, including something called Drunken Tai Chi, which I'm definitely going to watch. I can't really read the titles on any of these, but I want to dive further into Donnie Yen's film career. And this is a fairly cheap way of doing it. They don't even have the titles of the movies on the front. Now inside here you've got a little slipcover with the two DVDs in it, and a bit of writing in there that I don't understand. Again, these things were fairly cheap. I kind of like the packaging on them, and I'm always willing to take a punt in case there's something really good hiding amongst the bootleg movies that are on here. The next day after going to Sydney's Chinatown, I went to Newtown, which is my old stomping ground. I used to live there once upon a time, when the world was young and dinosaurs ruled the earth. And there's a shop on King Street called Hum, which does records and movies. So of course I was going to go there. I made my sister, my brother-in-law and my nephew sit outside while I looked through the shop. It took me about 20 minutes. And I dropped a few dollars and I found some interesting things. I actually went to the records first and found a deep cut hidden gem. It's a soundtrack EP for a movie I may want to do for a future video. It's Harry Kummel's Daughters of Darkness. And it's the EP of the soundtrack. It's a European pressing of it. It's a limited edition because it's numbered on the back. And yeah, I'm looking forward to playing with this one. There's the back cover, which has a bit of information about it. The music's by Francois de Roubaix. Haven't heard the soundtrack, but I like the movie so much, so I thought I would give this one a go. It's a recent pressing. It's only from 2019. Looking forward to playing that and just hearing it. So yeah, that's the first one, which is again a deep cut. Then I bought 3 DVDs. I didn't buy any Blu-rays. The Blu-rays I had I'd already got or didn't want. They had some good things though. They had Life or Death of Colonel Blimp. They had a whole bunch of Criterion editions. Prices were a little bit elevated. You can probably get them cheaper online. But shopping in a physical store gives you that serendipity. You can find things you weren't looking for, and you see them go, aha, I want that. And that's pretty much what I did with these. Talked about this movie briefly on the Eurospy video I did a long time ago. Directed by Michael Anderson, starring George Segal, Alec Guinness, Max von Sydow and Santa Berger. The Quiller Memorandum from 1968. Bit of a melancholy spy movie based on a novel by Adam Hall with a script by Harold Pinter. Max von Sydow plays a neo-Nazi in it, which is quite fun. Really interesting movie. It's one of my favourite George Segal movies of the 60s, along with things like King Rat. And it's set in Berlin and shows Berlin in the 60s really well, in the same way that the second Harry Palmer film, Funeral in Berlin, does. But the Quiller Memorandum is a little bit different. And it's a movie I really like. And it's, if you want to get away from Playboy secret agent kind of spy movies from the 60s, that's definitely a go-to. The next one, I was looking for the Kino Lorber Blu-ray off that came out recently. And the price I could get it for, including postage, was crazy high. So reluctantly I didn't. And instead I found the Kino Lorber DVD version of it at Hum, PJ, with George Peppard, Raymond Bird, Gail Honeycutt, Wilfred Hyde-White, Brock Peters and Susan St. James. It's got a soundtrack by Neil Hefti. It was directed by John Gilliman. Kind of spy drama thing. I haven't seen it and I'm looking forward to watching it, because I'm on that big George Peppard kick after seeing House of Cards, which Imprint put out on Blu-ray last year. So I'm eager to see more of these 1960s George Papard movies. And so that one was a nice find. This one I'm tempted to do back to back with Easy Rider when my 4K of Easy Rider comes through. Very controversial film, very weird film for MGM to do in the late 1960s, early 1970s. I think it may be about 1970. A little bit of an unusual project for the director as well. It's Michelangelo Antonioni's Zabriskie Point with Daria Halpin and Mark Frechette, and also Rod Taylor in it. Really weird critique of America during Nixon's era, and I'm looking forward to this. It's in widescreen, doesn't have any extras apart from the original theatrical trailer, but I wanted to do Zabriskie Point and talk about it for a while. Haven't watched it in a very long time. I think I watched it on TCM ages ago. I've got a couple of other Antonioni movies I haven't watched, so I don't know whether I'm going to binge 3 of them and watch L'Eclisse and maybe another one and then this. Who knows? Maybe Blow Up. Blow Up might be a good one. But I do now have the English edition of Zabriskie Point, which is not a bad thing. So that's my haul. I didn't buy it a lot in Sydney. I was mostly going after experiences in Chinese food, but I'm happy with what I got. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment and hitting the notification bell. You can also donate to the channel at patreon.com/paleocinema. Next video, I'm going to be doing the results of the 31 movies I suggested people narrow down to a list of 10 in my last video. All of them based on or with books based upon them. I've got well over 200 responses to that, so I'm going to have to collate the data first and then put together a video. So that's going to be a hell of a job. Then the top 10 movies, I'm going to be doing them in 3 lots of 3, 3 and then 4. And just going from there. Not looking forward to number crunching. I don't like being a bean counter. It's not my favourite thing in the world, but it'll be interesting to see which ones the audience liked out of those 31 movies. So I'm going to do my outro handheld because I took the camera off the stand. I won't put it back. Look after yourselves. Get out and about. 4 days in Sydney has really refreshed me, and I've got lots of new ideas for the channel. So get out and about if you can. Watch some good wuxia movies, watch some bad wuxia movies. Look after yourselves, and I'll catch you next time.